Hey, hey, and we're back with more on the history of cannabis, including the history of hemp. I want to make the transition now from some of the fiber stuff to hemp as a food. Truth be told, we've got, any seed bearing plant has some potential to be good for us. And I know you guys have heard my crazy vegan rants in the past. I promise to keep it completely reasonable. The big advantage of hemp seed nutrition is just that here's a plant that has a lot more protein in the seeds than a whole lot of other nuts and seeds. And although it is, high fat in a sense, it's a fat that is mostly unsaturated and potentially good for you, helping you to absorb some of the neat minerals that it also contains. So yeah, for 3 tablespoons, we're talking about an eighth of a cup there. This is a this is a plant that has 180 calories. There are 14 grams of fat, but again, it's that fat that's not so bad for you. It's only 2 grams of carbs. Now, if you just get the hemp hearts, this is all going to change. But my real take-home message is this is 4 milligrams of iron, which for a plant-based, non-heme iron, I know these are hard to absorb and often a challenge for folks who don't eat meat, but this is a low-risk source of iron. Men probably don't need as much iron as we once thought, but it's super good for you. So take home message on this: yes, people can eat hemp seed. It can be ground into a flour. It can be turned into any kind of cake or pie or anything like that. Just the roasted hemp seeds spiced, I used to actually give out as a Kahoot prize back in the day, but don't want to risk the trouble on that. But truth be told, anything that you see at often Trader Joe's has these hemp based cereals and things like that. They're definitely worth a try. I really want to encourage you to take advantage of that. And then the issue that seems to come up a lot is just, hey, will people be growing hemp and somehow sneaking in psychoactive cannabis into the fields or something like that? Let's take a look at really what this plant is all about when it's grown for industrial purposes. So here's a scene from the great Hemp for Victory film, which actually came out in the 1940s after the Marijuana Tax Act was already passed. But we needed the hemp so badly because we couldn't get any from Manila or anything processed in Japan because the war was on. And so farmers were encouraged to go ahead and grow hemp. They could get a special license for it. There's a movie, Hemp for Victory, that Jack Herer uncovered, and it's all over YouTube now if you want to see. But it's probably 12 minutes of people saying this is going to really be helpful for us, and it's still a very versatile source for rope. But you'll notice these are very long stalks, right? You could have a joint the size of a telephone pole and it's not going to be psychoactive. Most industrial hemp is 1% THC or less, whereas psychoactive and medicinal is now frequently more than 20% THC. So obviously, this just is not going to even hold a candle. And then they say, oh, well, you'll sneak the plants in there. Well, obviously these are going to cross pollinate each other. You'll end up with lousy hemp. It'll be short and more buddy, and lousy psychoactive cannabis, in that it's going to be all contaminated by this low THC strain. So in contrast, here's a bud. Obviously, nobody's going to make a shirt out of this. Nobody's going to turn this into fiber or anything like that. And hemp-based fiber products are not smokable. I don't know how many times I've had to explain this, but no, you're not going to take a hemp sock and put it in a pipe and fire it up and get anything but respiratory irritation and a headache. In addition, the oil soap, so basically those seeds are about half of a polyunsaturated fat. You can certainly make oil out of this, and then shampoo and soaps are an easy extension. Again, really eco-friendly. Another way to try something new and something different. They're scented. They're got all the variation we've always had. I'm not recommending the home game to go from a seed to an oil yourself. But if you do happen to be into making soap, hemp oil is certainly a wonderful resource for that kind of thing. And then I just did want to point out the Hemp Hotel in Amsterdam. Not that I've got anybody uh, working for me at the hemp hotel in Amsterdam, but this was also used as a flavoring agent in a number of brewed beers that were not always psychoactive even. So it's a curious way to approach food with novel and interesting takes. If you really get sucked into this, the name to know, and I do want you to know this for the test, is Jack Herer. Jack was a wonderful guy. I did buy a pair of hemp underwear from him. I probably wore them for like 7 years. Like it was just an amazing product, and really helped convince me. His book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, is where he presents some of his concerns about the conspiracy against cannabis. Does make some compelling points about basically how law enforcement has targeted some folks who are lower socioeconomic status. And obviously, we could be doing markedly better with hemp than, say, cotton or even linen if we were willing to open that up. Now, I'm not saying everything in here is still empirically based, but it's a wonderful read. And if you do get a copy, by all means, take a look at it. And then, yeah, Jack was a wonderful guy, and I just I want to have folks know who he was, because he really devoted his whole life to ending prohibition, trying to keep people out of jail, and also saving the world by having us focus more on renewable plants. All right, well, so now let's think of this as a separate history now. If we go to the history of cannabis in the medical domain, we really don't have tons of evidence for uh, medical uses prior to good old Shenang. And now I know he's a mythical character. He's sort of the Johnny Appleseed, if you will. Nobody's saying Shenang was a real dude, but the Emperor Shenang gets credit for the early pharmacopoeias in the Asian countries. And the legends are hilarious and wild. Apparently, somebody thought he had a hole in his stomach where he could put things inside his stomach and test them, right? And it's just lots of fun legends. But he gets credit in part because I think it's probably been around for a really long time. And what did he recommend it for? Well, what a surprise. The things that we still use medical cannabis for, and we'll have a whole lecture on data-based medical uses of cannabis, but things like rheumatism, arthritis, pain, insomnia, right? And what a surprise, we still have those uses today. Now, some of the other ones are, not so prevalent anymore, or just not the issue they once were, because we have developed other medications. So I'm not saying medical marijuana is a panacea. It's not a cure for everything. It's just a really good tool to have in our armament for a subset of issues that we'll have a full lecture on, but also allude to as we walk through the history. So big issues here as far as just where does it go in the history. We don't have a ton of recordings, but in 1621, Burton published The Anatomy of Melancholy. He was trying to basically have a model for what we now call clinical depression. Thought whatever is going on with cannabis was clearly involved. He got an award for this. It's a wonderful history of psychopathology contributor, if nothing else. And in the 1760s, so by the time, really before the U.S. was even the U.S., we already had cannabis-based meds in the dispensatory. So the New England area had lots of folks growing hemp. They didn't necessarily breed it for high THC or medicinal qualities, but you could get a hemp tincture for some of those same ailments we've already talked about. And unfortunately, the quality control wasn't perfect. Some of them were alcohol-based, so we got all the negatives of alcohol. But we were obviously immersed in medical uses literally hundreds of years before the Marijuana Tax Act made it illegal in 1937. And then two big names in medical marijuana that I just do want you to know is O'Shaughnessy, an Irish physician who went down to India, saw how widely used cannabis was, did some early animal work with dogs had a hypothesis that maybe vegetarian animals were more sensitive to THC than meat eaters. It was all not as systematic as we would do today, but he wrote back to the United Kingdom and helped spread the word about this in the 1830s. He ended up working for a telegraph company. Like the guy's had an amazing life. It was kind of wild. And then Jean-Jacques Moreau, who we alluded to when we were talking about the Hashish Club, which we'll talk to. But basically, this crew of French artists and writers and painters and things all hung out at Moreau's house. It sounds like once a month they sort of had a little ritual where they ate some hash candies and sang songs and praised each other. But apparently he would dish it out and say, all right, this will be taken away from your allotment in heaven. So they were kind of this underground pseudo, is it religious, is it spiritual, is it recreational, we don't know. And he actually built on some of Burton's stuff about high cannabis intoxication as a model for psychosis, but also its potential for antidepressant effects. So with that in mind, I do want to slip a couple of key ideas in about cannabis pharmacology more broadly, just so we're all going to be speaking the same language whenever you do hear more about cannabis. So of course there are a lot of active ingredients. Despite what we were told initially, there are over 100 identified cannabinoids now, and it comes in various different preparations. So we're seeing more than we ever have, thanks primarily to the taxed and regulated market. Potency is a key issue. I mean, the range is startling, and as we've discussed in the past, smoked psychoactives or smoked medicines, don't even, that term doesn't even make any sense to folks, but this is going to contribute to the duration of the effect and its intensity. So different forms of administration are more likely to create different effects. Metabolism is relatively straightforward, but this is a fat soluble molecule. So THC itself is going to be crossing the blood-brain barrier relatively easy because it's fat soluble, and some of its metabolites are particularly fat soluble, which explains why we get such dramatic long-term effects of edibles versus inhalation or vaporized. And then we do have an endogenous cannabinoid system. It's quite the mystery. Meshulam, folks in Israel have done some really wonderful hallmark work on that. Let's get into it. All right, well, definitely for the test, you got to know THC when you see it. It's sometimes called Delta 9 THC, and the clincher is it's just how we designate the names of molecules in organic chemistry. There is a Delta 8, but it's incredibly rare in most modern plants, and it is psychoactive, and the animal work on that has been splitting hairs about, is it more, is it less? I'm not sure it's even a productive line of discussion. But then to understand 11-hydroxy delta 9 THC is important, because this is the molecule that is made by your liver when it's metabolizing THC, and it happens to really go through that blood-brain barrier quickly. It's fat soluble also, and it's unclear exactly why it penetrates so quickly. And it's, depending upon which measures you use, 3 times as psychoactive. And this is the clincher for safe use of edible products. Start low and go slow. I cannot say this enough. So we saw with Stacy Farmer's paper on aversiveness, everybody has a haunting edible story, but 8% of that sample also said it was the most meaningful, or one of the most meaningful experiences of their lives. So setting your always going to be key, but edibles are not a toy, and make sure that you understand dosage, and less is really more on this. It's an important key to harm reduction. And there are several other cannabinoid molecules that are worth knowing, and I'll definitely be testing these if you are taking an exam in my class. first and foremost, cannabidiol, which used to be believed that it was derived from THC as the plant matures. Those data are disputed now. I don't need you to know that. But what we are seeing is it may only be active at moderate doses. And again, there's a lot of debate on this. The anxiolytic effects in particular, at least acutely, don't kick in until like 300 milligrams, at least on the published data, but other folks really swear by just having 30 milligrams a day. I haven't seen good placebo-controlled work, and I want to be mindful of that. Cannabidiol itself has an intriguing antipsychotic effect, and some researchers in Germany have added it at up to 800 milligrams per day for some folks as an adjunct to their regular antipsychotic meds. In contrast to, say, Marinol, which a high dose of Marinol, which is just pure THC dissolved in sesame oil, suspended basically, is going to be really, really potentially haunting and have a lot of psychotic features, increased magical ideation, some delusional thinking. It's a frightening thing to experience. And if you see somebody take those 10 milligram Marinol and they're not prepared for it, it is not a good idea at all. The anti-seizure properties have been confirmed now. Dr. Warren Davinsky down at NYU has shown, particularly for children who had often dozens, if not 100 seizures in a day, can at high doses of cannabidiol basically drop those to just a couple. And then soporific effects, the CBD-induced challenges to insomnia. Basically, there is a relaxation effect. It looks like it's biphasic, so that you have to take CBD at least an hour and a half before bed. There's a mild increase in arousal and then a drop, and want to just time that so you end up in bed on time. All right, I'm a little scared about the size of the file here, so I'm going to go ahead and store this, and we will pick up with active ingredients on Cannabis History 2.